As an ex-Muslim, one of the most common questions I get asked is, where in the Bible does Jesus allow people to worship him? In fairness, this is an excellent question, and it's a question that every Christian on earth should be ready to answer. Unfortunately, if we're being honest, many Christians don't know how to answer this question. So, in this video, we're going to look at examples in the scriptures of people worshiping Jesus and how he responds to that worship. But that's not all we're going to do. There's a twist here. One of the sources that we are going to use to answer this question is the Quran. Let's get started. From the earliest parts of his life, Jesus was worshipped. Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." These wise men who came from the east were eventually told by Herod to go to Bethlehem. When the wise men arrived, they found Jesus in his home. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. Now, our Muslim friends will argue, well, Jesus was only an infant in this story, and so he couldn't correct the wise men and tell them not to worship him. And in all fairness, that's a very valid point. But I have a question. If Jesus was only an infant here and couldn't tell the wise men to not worship him, then how do we explain Surah 5, verse 110, where the Quran claims that Jesus was able to speak from the cradle? I mean, if Jesus is able to speak as an infant and he is not supposed to be worshipped as the Quran claims, then wouldn't he have just told the wise men not to worship him? Let's talk about Jesus as an adult now. Jesus was a worker of many miracles. This included healing people from their sicknesses and physical ailments. In John chapter 9, Jesus meets a man who was born blind and has been blind his entire life. Jesus anoints this blind man's eyes with clay that he made himself and tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The blind man came back able to see, and his neighbors who knew him were astonished. So the neighbors take him to go see the Pharisees. There's a brief debate between everyone about who Jesus is. Finally, the Jews ask the healed man what he thinks of Jesus. Pay close attention here. The healed man originally says that he thinks the man who healed him, Jesus, is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe this man. They claimed Jesus to be an ordinary man, a sinner like you and I. The blind man answers the Jews in the synagogue by saying, "We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." This healed man testifies that Jesus is not a sinner, but at the very least, he is sent by God. Because the healed man said this, the Jews kicked him out of the synagogue. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. The Quran claims that Jesus is merely a prophet, but there's a problem with this statement. First, Jesus openly declares to this man that he is the Son of God. He does this by asking the man, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" The man asks him in return, "Who is he, so that I can believe in him?" And Jesus plainly tells him, "You're speaking to the Son of God right now." When the man heard this, he worshipped Jesus, and Jesus did not stop him. But this isn't the only time that Jesus is worshipped as an adult. He is worshipped on a boat. He is worshipped after his resurrection. He is worshipped on a mountain. He is worshipped after ascending into heaven. And not once does Jesus condemn others worshiping him. According to the Quran, it's a sin to worship anyone but God or Allah. And that's understandable. But according to the Quran, Jesus is also sinless. Surah 19 verse 19 states, the angel Gabriel spoke to Mary saying, I am only a messenger of your Lord to announce to you a faultless son. The Arabic words that are used in this verse are wilamin zaqiya. This means blameless, without sin. The hadith also confirms this by saying, the Satan, shaitan, touches every son of Adam on the day when his mother gives birth to him, with the exception of Mary and her son. If it is in fact a sin to worship Jesus, then that would make Jesus himself a sinner for allowing other people to worship him. But according to the Quran, Jesus is sinless. So, if Jesus, being sinless, allows other people to worship him, that can only mean one thing, that Jesus is to be worshipped. Do you remember my video explaining the Holy Trinity? I'll put it right here if you haven't seen it. In that video, we learned that Jesus openly declared that he is God by referring to himself as the Son of Man. In fact, Jesus' favorite way of referring to himself was Son of Man. This comes from Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, where it says, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. All peoples, nations, and languages, that includes you Muslims, should serve him. But what does that word serve really mean? The Hebrew word for serve that is used in this verse is pelach. Pelach means to serve, worship, and work for in the sense of a deity. Pelach in the Hebrew language is the highest form of service and worship that any person can ever give. Similarly, the Quran teaches that only Allah or God is worthy of such worship. In fact, all Muslims are required to say this when they confess their faith. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, which translates to, I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah or God. So, if the Son of Man is supposed to receive pelach just as God is, then why does the Quran say that he is simply a prophet? Remember, Jesus is sinless according to the Quran. So, when he calls himself the Son of Man, who is to be worshipped just as God is, he cannot be lying. The Quran also teaches in Surah 22 that only God is the final judge. All authority on that day is for Allah alone. He will judge between them. Those who believe and do good will be in the gardens of bliss. But those who disbelieve and deny our revelations, it is they who will suffer a humiliating punishment. In Matthew 25, Jesus says this about himself. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. Just like the Quran teaches that it is God who separates the righteous from the unrighteous and judges between them, Jesus says the same thing about himself. He elaborates even further in John chapter 5 by saying this, "For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father." All people, again, that includes you Muslims, are to give Jesus the same honor and praise as they would to God himself. So, why does a Christian like myself worship Jesus? Well, I have a better question. If both the Quran and the Bible teach that Jesus was a worker of many miracles, that Jesus was sinless, and that Jesus is the final judge, then my question is this: why don't you Muslims worship him? If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe so I can continue to make content like this. Until next time, salam.